What does Adam Lanza, the grade school shooter of Newtown, Connecticut, who killed 27 people, of which 20 were young children under the age of 7? Stephen Paddock, the Vegas shooter, who killed 61 people and injured 861, of which 411 were by his own gunfire, and St. Francis and St. Joan of Arc have in common? Answer: all 4 of them heard voices in their head. But why such different actions and results? One group are infamous shooters, while the other group became great and holy saints. All people hear voices in their head, some more drastic and diabolical, and some holy and angelic. How can we tell the difference? Do we even hear the voices in our head? Hello everyone. Today's episode is about discerning the voices in our head and harnessing the power of those voices to become holy, like so many great and holy saints in the Catholic Church did. Not theoretical, but practical. Real-life Catholic advice from Practical Catholic.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins in the winter of my sophomore year in high school during wrestling season. I was always an intense person, even growing up. I remember my father always telling me that I was probably the worst and the best of his children. I always did the best things, but I also did the worst things because I was passionate in what I did. And so wrestling was one of my sports that I did. Football was my other one. And I was very passionate about wrestling. I would exercise constantly because wrestling is literally a 24/7 sport. It wasn't something that you just went to practice and that was it. Mainly because you had to diet, you had to lose weight. So to put an understanding to this, I played football in the fall and I weighed about 165 in football season. I had to get bulked up, to play football. But in wrestling, I wrestled at 130 to 135. So I had to cut about 30 to 35 pounds in the wrestling season. So not outside of just becoming stronger. So not only do you have to lose weight, and I did that naturally through, dieting and everything, but I only lost about 20 pounds naturally by losing weight. So I had to lose another 10 pounds of water weight when I got weighed in. So naturally, I could go down to about 140, probably 145, and then I would have to lose about 8 to 10 pounds worth of water weight. So I would run with these, basically, sweatpants, layers of sweatpants, plastic suit, and I would run and run and run, and it would be very hot in there. So I remember this one day, I decided to run because I had to lose weight. And then I went into my high school's boiler room, right, which made it even hotter because the boiler room was very, very hot because it pretty much heated this whole school. And it was a large school. So I'm there just kind of sitting there just trying to sweat this thing out. And I'm just tired and exhausted and kind of depressed because I'm just, I couldn't do things with my friends because I'm just, intense with, making this weight. Why am I doing these crazy things? And I heard this little voice, and the voice said, just end it. End it all. Just kill yourself. And it just kept saying that. Just kill yourself. Just kill yourself. That's it. This is the end. And I remember that voice. And, I remember thinking about it and, just kind of ruminating about it. But then I just said, well, I have to go to practice. And I just went out and, finished my practice and so that I could, make weights and do whatever I needed to do. And, I remember that. And I would get those voices every once in a while during my high school years, usually when I was tired and exhausted, when I was pushing myself really hard, these voices would kind of come in. Now, I remember that happening, and it would even happen sometimes when I was in the Marines. So after high school, I joined the Marines, and that again being very intense and, having a lot of pressures and everything, this voice would kind of bother me a little bit. That would say that, just end it right now. Just kill yourself. After my conversion, I would have other voices that would pop in, right? And most of the time I learned through spirituality that those voices were just diabolical obsessions that, you learn to just throw away and say, look, that's ridiculous. But I was able to also hear other voices, angelic voices that came along that I started listening to. And they were very, very powerful. Some of them actually led me to become a Third Order Franciscan, even though I didn't want to. It led me to the Third Order of St. Francis. So voices in our heads. This is what today's episode is all about. And, one of the things we have to understand is when I was in high school, the reason why the voices were so strong, these diabolical, obsessions and voices in high school were so strong, was because in high school and after I left high school, when I went in the Marines, I stopped going to church. I would just be what I would call the holiday churchgoers, which you went Christmas and you went in Easter, and everything else you didn't. I didn't go to confession. I probably received the Eucharist unworthily. Create a perfect storm for diabolical obsession. And that's basically what happened. That's why I had those. So, again, today's topic we're going to talk about are these voices in our head that are there. Believe it or not, we're all listening to voices. Whether you think you are or not, you are listening to voices that are in your head. Okay? Some of the times that you do it so mechanically that you don't even realize it. And we'll talk about that later. All right? So before we talk about this topic, I want to add a disclaimer here, okay? Today's topic, and also next week's topic, because I'm going to continue this as a two-part series, I'm going to discuss the limitations of science and psychology. It might even sound like I'm just, talking about it in a disparaging way, okay? But I'm not really disparaging science and psychology. What I'm emphasizing here is that science and psychology has limitations, okay? And so one of the things that we have to understand is that where its limitations are, this is where spirituality comes into play. And after Vatican II, the Church has done a revamping of a lot of things, even exorcism and the Mass, to incorporate psychology and science to its, diabolical understanding. So, by no means am I saying that, psychology is just a bunch of nonsense and science is a bunch of nonsense. That's not what it is. You're going to get that idea as I'm showing these things. It's just that I'm showing where the limitations are in those two sciences. Okay? So, as I mentioned before, we're going to break this down into 2 episodes. So today's episode is about harnessing the power of the voice in our head, and we're going to be focusing on basically the problems of the voices in our heads in today's society, okay? Why is it that the voices, okay, which are good and bad, are minimized in today's society, and the problems why society won't allow us to actually hear them, right? And focus on them and help us build and become great saints. The second is putting a context around the voices in our heads, what we're talking about. And then I'm going to briefly describe the 4 voices, which I kind of classify that there's 4 voices that we hear in our head, and that how, and then next week's episode, we're going to do a deeper dive on the 4 voices, okay, and elaborate on them, and how to encourage the good voices and how to minimize the bad voices. And then the third is discern which and leverage the voices to become a saint, okay? In fact, I call that part mainly using your guardian angel as your personal secretary. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to break this down into 2-part episode, all right? So I want to talk about real quickly the zooming out main point in today's episode, all right? We have to understand that our decisions and choices and actions and reasoning that we do every day are deeply influenced by the voices in our heads. These voices are good or bad, and we need to have a better understanding of them to become saints, because we need to harness those voices to become good and holy. But the main point, zooming out, is that we do have voices in our heads that determine good actions or bad actions. Okay? So I'm going to give you an example. Adam Lanza, who was a 20-year-old kid who basically killed 26 people, 20 of them between the ages of 6 and 7 in Newtown, Connecticut. And listen to this. Okay? When they did the investigation, he says he only remembered, this is what Adam Lanza is saying, a small amount of details. He mentioned both auditory and visual hallucinations. In other words, he was hearing things, okay, voices in his head, okay? This is coming from him, all right? He would say that he heard auditory and visual hallucinations, which is auditory voices, okay? Stephen Paddock, he was the Vegas shooter who killed 61 people and injured 61 with 411 with his own gun. His girlfriend would say he would lie in bed just moaning and screaming, "Oh my God," one of the officials recalled. In other words, he was tormented in his head. He was hearing voices, okay, and he was seeing, again, hallucinations, all right? St. Francis, listen to this. This is a story of St. Francis. He found him. This is the story of St. Francis when he's looking at the cross, and a voice, and he hears a voice that says, "Rebuild my church." Listen to this. It says, St. Francis found himself wandering about outskirts of his hometown of Assisi in the hills of Umbria, breathtaking vistas at every turn, but he seemed to hardly notice until he came upon St. Damiano, a little church in need of good bit of repair. He entered and knelt down underneath a large wooden crucifix painted in the Byzantine style of an icon. The open eyes of Jesus on the cross seemed to lock him in a state that was both intimidating and beckoning at the same time. He couldn't look away as feelings of doubt and fear, guilt and desire welled upon with him. "Lord, what do you want me to do?" he asked. "Show me what you want me to do with my life." And the Lord answered. A voice, as clear as the day, responded, "Francis, go and rebuild my church, which, as you see, is falling down." Now, St. Francis, with his simple humility, thought it was the Church of St. Damiano, but in reality, it was the Catholic Church, because in that period, 12th century, the Catholic Church was falling apart. Faithfully, people were not, we talk about there's no faith here nowadays. There was no faith, back 800 years ago, okay? The church was collapsing. We had bad bishops. We had bad cardinals, okay? They were selling indulgences. They were doing lots of things. And it would come to a clash in 1500s when Martin Luther would talk about all these bad things that the church was doing. So, it was falling apart. And so St. Francis eventually would rebuild the Catholic Church. So now let's go to St. Joan of Arc, okay? And let's see what happens there. St. Joan of Arc writes, "When I was 13, I heard a voice from God to help me to govern myself. The first time I was terrified. The voice came to me about noon. It was summer, and I was in my father's garden. I saw it many times before I knew it was Saint Michael. He was not alone, but duly attended by heavenly angels. He told me Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret would come to me, and I must follow their counsel, that they were appointed to guide and counsel me in what I had to do, and that I must believe what they would tell me, for it was at our Lord's command." Now that was just the words of St. Joan of Arc. And if you ever study St. Joan of Arc, it was these voices that would guide her practically throughout her life. And when those voices ended was when her martyrdom would begin. So she had almost like a twofold martyrdom. The voices started ending, and then she went through her physical trial of her physical martyrdom. So these voices, they're important. Now, I want to read to you the Bible, okay? This comes from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 2 through 11. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim, so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down within the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So Samuel went and lay down, and the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel rose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and arose and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant hears. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood forth, calling as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for thy servant hears. Then the Lord said to Samuel. So this is a great example of listening to the voice. This is also a great example that even as good holy Catholics, we might not recognize the voices and understand these voices. So a good spiritual director or a good spiritual coach will be like Eli and say, we have to discern. And how do we discern? And say, say, Speak, Lord. So there's a guidance by Eli. There's this calling that Samuel is having. All right? So these voices we all have. And we'll talk about that, okay? We need to be in tune with those voices. And not only in tune with those voices, but we also need to be able to harness those voices, the good voices, so we become holy and great saints, okay? And defend ourselves against bad voices that lead us to bad actions. So we see this voice that's going on that we need to understand and harness that power, okay? So you might be saying to me, I don't have these voices. But the answer is yes, you do. Okay? Yes, you do. The voices are there. And we'll talk about that more. Next episode, I'll give you a little glimmer later at the end of this, but they're there. Okay? So that's a zoom out aspect. So there are these voices, and those voices actually, can be diabolical and lead us to bad actions as we see these shooters, or to be great saints. Okay? So today's zoom in point that we're going to talk about is that, if we have ignorance of our spiritual life, and if we're not seeking holiness, and we have too much reliance on science and psychology that explains things away, we're never going to be able to become great saints. Because great saints were able to harness these voices inside of them. And, angelic. It is said that... Saint? I forget the saint. One of the great saints. He would be attacked by Satan all the time with disparaging remarks, and those types of things. So there's always these voices that occur, and we have to understand them because they take a toll on us. They might be disparaging remarks. You're a failure. You're a loser. You're never going to go to heaven. All these other things. And so we have to understand that those voices, don't make us crazy, don't make us lunatics or anything like that. We just need to know how to be in tune with the good voices and defend ourselves and ignore the bad voices. Okay? So what is the problem with today's society, and why is it that we're not focusing with these voices that are in our head? Okay? The biggest problem we have is the world, right? The world explains things away with modern psychology. Psychology is the new spirituality, I would call it. It's replacing spirituality. And as I said, I'm not here to disparage, and I'm not talking badly about psychology because I think it's necessary. It's just that it has become the new spirituality, and it's the worst thing. It really is. Because it just makes life a crutch rather than really curing people and growing them into the human beings that they need to be. That's the real thing, okay? So they try to explain it, okay? They make the voices seem like you're crazy, okay? You must be crazy if you're hearing voices, okay? Or they try to say, well, it's psychotic, it's hallucinating or whatever, okay? But I'm going to read a couple of things, okay, that is important to understand, all right? Because these voices are not limited to psychology. Yes, we do have mental issues. Yes, there are mental issues that are out there. So I'm not trying to say that everything is not a mental issue. In fact, I'm going to prove that those shooters, those killers that were out there were probably diabolical, okay, diabolically influenced, Okay, so let's read about Adam Lanza. Okay, he's a 20-year-old that killed 26 people, 20 of them being 6 and 7 years old. Okay, now this is the report from the Connecticut State Attorney's Office when they were talking about this the killing. Right, this is the final report, and it says the November 2013 report issued by the Connecticut State Attorney's Office concluded that Lanza acted alone and planned his actions, but provided no indication why he did so. Listen to that. They could not figure out why did he kill? Why did he do this? Okay, they had no motive. They had no idea. No one suspected that he would do this. Okay, or why he targeted the school. A report issued by the Office of the Child Advocate in November 2014 said that Lanza had Asperger's syndrome, and as a teenager suffered from depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder, but concluded that they had neither caused nor led to his murderous acts. Listen to that. So he had all of these psychological issues: Asperger's syndrome, depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, but neither of those would have caused this murderous act. They wouldn't, right? The report went on to say his severe and deteriorating internalized mental health problems, combined with an atypical preoccupation with violence, access to deadly weapons, provide a recipe for mass murder. That's what they're trying to say, right? But the problem is, just because you have these mental issues doesn't mean that you're a murderer. There was something inside of his head, okay, that was egging him on and leading him on to do this killing, okay? Because depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive, and Asperger's syndrome, even if it combined together, do not make a mental, health issue that leads you to kill 26 people, okay, in a school. It won't happen, okay? So there was something internally, a voice, a diabolical voice that led him that said, go and kill these people, okay? And he had them. People said he even admits it, that I had these, audible and visual hallucinations that were there. So we're going to talk about that a little bit further. So clearly, mental issues are not going to cause this person to go and kill people, because there are tons of people who are depressed, have anxiety, have obsessive compulsive disorder, have Asperger syndrome. Yeah, they're not murderers. They don't go and kill people, especially at this degree. Something had to lead him to do that, and that is the diabolical voice. Psychology Today, listen to this. When they're explaining this, even they are confused. Listen to what they have to say. This is an article from Psychology Today about Adam Lanza. Even though he said he only remembered, this is Adam. Even though Adam said he only remembered a small amount of details, he mentioned both auditory and visual hallucinations. This is the best evidence we have that Lanza was psychotic. The date of this message was October 23rd, 2010, which was over 2 years before his attack. During those 2 years, his functioning deteriorated. He stopped going to college, cut off contact with his father and brother, and became increasingly reclusive. Perhaps his psychotic symptoms became more frequent and or more severe. Though Lanza was a very complicated person, the combination of his poverty of speech, flattened affect, inability to function in any major life's domain, whether it's education, love, friendship, whatever, paranoia and hallucinations all point to a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Even if Lanza did have schizophrenia, however, this alone would not explain his attack. Listen to that. Even if he had schizophrenia, this alone would not explain his attack. People suffering from schizophrenia typically are not more likely to be violent than the general population. So in other words, even if he had schizophrenia, even if he had these hallucinations and they were schizophrenia, it wouldn't lead him to this attack, this massive killing of these children. So what was egging him on? Clearly a diabolical influence, okay? That's what was going on. Was there ever a study to say, did he do any type of, Ouija board or some kind of the occult or anything like that? No. Why would psychology even think about studying that? Because that's the realm of theology. That's the realm of spirituality. Okay? Perhaps maybe he didn't go to mass. All these things that are going on. So we have to understand that mental psychology is very limited. Okay? Because even they are noticing that, hey, just because you're schizophrenic, just because you have mental disorder, doesn't make you a murderer, which we know that. Because there are tons of people who are schizophrenic, and they're not murderers. They don't kill these people. But there was something going on that had a diabolical aspect of the voice. Okay? So let's now talk about Stephen Paddock. Okay? Stephen Paddock is the Vegas shooter. He's the one that he holds now the number one killer with 61 and injuring a lot. So here's something that's going on. So here's the report that the police made, okay, about Paddock. According to police, Paddock acted alone. His motives remain unknown. There has been some discussion around brain pathology, initially thought to be benign as possible contributor. Paddock were sent to Stanford University to receive more extensive analysis of his brain. The Stanford pathologies found no abnormalities present within the brain. In other words, again, going back to science, looking at his brain. Oh, there's nothing unusual about his brain, okay? All right, because they're trying to figure out if it's just his brain. Investigators believe that he was obsessed with cleanliness and possibly had bipolar disorder. So if he's obsessed with cleanliness, in other words, OCD, he's bipolar disorder. Although a doctor did offer him antidepressants, he only accepted anxiety medication. It was reported that he was fearful of medication and often refused to take it. The doctor also prescribed Paddock as odd and showing little emotion. Psychologists ex post facto, in other words, after the fact, have noted a distinct similarity between Paddock's demeanor and the psychological construct alexithymia, which might have modulated his decision to conduct the shooting given his association with various mass murderers throughout history. Okay? So what they're saying is this other disorder might have caused it. We don't know. Okay? There's no motive. We just don't know what it is, right? But listen to Paddock's girlfriend, okay, what she says. The girlfriend recalls that Las Vegas shooter lying in bed screaming to himself, okay? And this is what the investigators found. When they had talked to Stephen Paddock's girlfriend, the girlfriend said, he would lie in bed just moaning and screaming, oh my God, one of the officials recalled, okay? Think about that. So he was tormented probably by diabolical obsession, all right? That's what he was probably done. Again, this is a point where, we're so literally looking at the brain to answer all of these questions like these mass shootings, and to the point where they actually analyzed the brain to see if it's abnormal, and there was no abnormalities about his brain. But again, it goes back to voices in their heads and the diabolical obsession that was probably pulled there. But is science going to check that out? Is science going to, look at it from a spiritual forensic level? We have forensics in the natural order, but we need to have forensics in the supernatural order to investigate these things from a supernatural level. But it will never be done that way. It will never be a supernatural forensic. Perhaps having an exorcist to study what's going on with this. But clearly, if I were, I'm the average lay Joe average theology person, you have to say that, modern psychology can't answer it, all right? But it all smells like a diabolical obsession, a diabolical influence that led these two men to kill innocent women and children and causing serious injuries to others. So why not? The bottom line, there's no explanation of these killings. Mental health does not equate to mass murder. Everyone will tell you that. Even the psychologists will tell you that. No one can explain what would motivate them. Friends and family said this is not like them to do this. When they interviewed family and friends of both Adam and Stephen, they basically said this was so unexpected. We would, never. If this guy was a criminal and had a whole history of beating and all this, yes, but out of the blue, this is what happened. They seem to have mental anguish. This is another thing common. They seem to have mental anguish as if they were tormented by something or some idea, i.e. voices. Okay? What are they tormented by? Diabolical obsession or diabolical voices that they're hearing in their voice. That's what would lead them to those killings. That's what leads people, I think, to suicide. Okay? We want to explain everything psychologically and scientifically. Okay? So that's problem one. And it's the biggest problem right now that we have. If we look at, I wish one day they would maybe do a psychological test on great saints, right? If we could have done a psychological test on Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or a psychological test on Saint John Paul II, right? But no, okay? We wouldn't do that. Why? Because they did great, nice things, right? So the psychology only emphasizes the negativity. What makes a good person good? We analyze great saints psychologically, right? And you probably won't see any difference, okay? The only difference is a spiritual one. They heard the good voices, the angelic voices, and they listened to them, okay? Either Mother Teresa heard a voice when she was in the train to leave the convent that she was in to start a new order to help the people of India. Okay? So it's these voices. So not all voices are bad. Number 3, okay? Another problem. Our reliance in science and not spirituality. Okay? I'm going to read you. This comes from the medical news today. Okay? And there's an article. All right? When it comes to voices in our heads, okay, there are 2 things that people that science will say that those voices are, right? The first would be, that's just ourselves talking to ourselves, right? A lot of times they'll say, these are voice, what I call voice of reason. These are brains treats talking inside of our heads as essentially the same thing as talking out loud, okay? So all it is just our thinking. That's what it is. It just basically limits what I would call, one of the voices, okay, which I call the voice of reason, okay, instead of looking at the other voices that are out there, okay? So science says if you hear voices, it's just you talking out loud, basically, or talking inside of you, all right? Or they'll say if that's the case, then it's probably schizophrenia and hallucinations. That's what it is, schizophrenia or hallucinations. And here's in that news article, it says, a common symptom of schizophrenia is auditory verbal hallucinations or hearing voices that other people do not hear. For some time, it has been assumed that these hallucinations are a result of problems with inner speech. Think about that. They're basically just saying that, essentially they're hearing these inner things that are basically chalked up as they can't speak and that they're just trying to speak inside of themselves, okay? Yet, could it be diabolical? Could it even be angelic, okay? We don't know, right? But this is the science that we're looking at. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I am saying that there's also an alternative as well. And I know that this alternative exists, that there's good voices, angelic as well as demonic voices that influence us deeply. And so schizophrenia, which I believe only affects young men and women, and only around 1% of them, how many of them, but how many of the 98 point whatever are influenced by voices? Yet we turn them off because we think, I must be crazy. I must be crazy for listening, hearing those voices, in doing that. So we have to understand that most of us are being influenced, okay, by voices in our decisions and actions. We need to be in tune with those, okay? So number 4, okay, understand that the devil loves this idea that his influences are being masked as psychotic to hide the devil. In other words, the devil loves it. The devil loves it when atheists can say, or people who just rely too much on science and psychology to say, oh, that's just a psychotic behavior, or that's a schizophrenic behavior, okay? Because at least it's not saying, oh, that's the devil that's doing that or influencing you. Because once you know the enemy's inside of you, you can then defend yourself. But if you're chasing after the wrong enemy, okay, then you'll always be attacked by the true enemy. So the devil loves it, okay? It's the greatest defense for him when people ignore who really is the enemy within, which is the diabolical obsession, okay? So, the devil loves it, and the devil will continue to propagate this idea, okay? Again, it's that whole adage, is it science or spirituality? It's both, okay? And most of the time, it is spirituality. Schizophrenia affects, it says, again, like 1% of young men and women. 1%. But all of us are affected by voices in our head. All of us. Not just the schizophrenic. Okay? Number 5. Even our own Catholic circles, I find that people are more worried about diabolical possessions, and they know very little about diabolical obsessions, okay, which are the voices or influences that run through our head. And even more, they know very little on how to harness the good voices that run, the angelic, the guardian angels, minimally at least, the guardian angels influence. That's even worse, because now you're not even harnessing the power of the guardian angel, okay? And who else that might be talking? The good saints, my wife, a sidestep a little bit of this. My wife, who is a devout Catholic and a wonderful woman, she does have, she's, I guess, German, German attitude where everything's very logical for her. And I'm not saying that she doesn't, believe in the spiritual realm. She definitely does. But there is a certain level of skepticism. And this story is beautiful. One day we were able to go to Padre Pio's first-class relic. It was a bloody glove at a local church. And my wife heard Padre Pio's voice. And Padre Pio said that he blessed our family. And she smelled celestial smells, and she was able to feel his blessing. It was wonderful. She heard the voice of Padre Pio saying, "Know that I have blessed your family." Now, that is another voice, a voice of a saint to my wife, okay? And again, this is not a story that my wife would just create because she's very skeptical in that aspect of it. But it's a beautiful story. It really is. So the point I'm getting at is even in our Catholic circles, even those are so worried and wrapped about diabolical possessions, that's when a devil takes over our body, that I think we don't focus on diabolical obsessions, which are a lot more common and frequent. And not only that, but focus on maybe we should be listening to our guardian angels, okay? And again, we'll talk about that more on episode 2. The next episode next week, which is part 2 of this one. So we understand that, okay? Number 6, Catholics make voices seem like all voices are evil, okay? This goes back to the idea that, that voices in our head must be evil, okay? It must be bad, or I'm crazy, or something like that. And some of the voices are, because some of the voices are very disparaging. You're going to hear a lot. I get it all the time. You're a loser. You're not going to make it. You're going to fail. You're a failure. All these things that come in these voices. And you just kind of say, okay, whatever. And then you move on. But the real power comes in when you hear the voice of your guardian angel, when you hear the voice of the great, saints, or you hear the voice of God. Again, I'm not trying, this is not a bragging or anything like that, but I will say that I probably heard an audible, I've heard at least 5 to 6 times strong, like audible voices from God. And I'll share one of them next week. Then I would probably say another 5 or 6 times strong inspirations that I know only God could have given me. But those, events don't impact me as much as that at least 2 or 3 times I get soft inspirations to do my prayers, to say I'm sorry. And I know those are coming from my guardian angel. So those are more frequent. They happen 2 or 3 times a day, at least, if not a little bit more. And those are what we need to harness the power to become great saints, to love God and our neighbor. Okay? So it's important to not just think that there's voices in my head, so they must be evil, but to focus on the good voices that are there. Okay? Number 7, lack of proper spirituality that understands the soul and forces that influence, in soul, and the forces that influence it, either good or bad. In other words, so many times a lot of people take spirituality and they latch on to something. Oh, pray the rosary. Oh, that's great. Pray the rosary, right? And then it becomes route, and and then they're not growing in spirituality. Or they have a certain novena, or they go to daily mass, or they go to confession. They have some special little thing that they do, which but they don't really know spirituality, the direction in which they should be going. A pathway. Okay, we call the Franciscan order calls it the seraphic pathway. We have a pathway to get to the seraphic order, which is the second highest of the highest choir, in heaven. Okay? So in other words, we're getting pretty high up there. We have this pathway of spirituality to go there. And so it's very, very, St. Thomas Aquinas, all the stuff that I am talking about the soul and about the different parts of the soul and the diabolical obsessions, these come from the Dominican order. This is so it comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, Garalou Lagrange, Father Morin, who was a Dominican. These are all great theological Dominicans in the spiritual world, okay? St. John of the Cross. So this is there. It's written down exactly what the soul is made of, how it's affected, and how we can conquer these things, okay? So if you have a holistic approach to spirituality and you have a good understanding of it, we are going to be able to understand what influences our soul. And the voices in our head absolutely impact those voices, okay, our decisions and our actions. So that's number 7. Number 8. Voices in our heads are getting a bad rap because not all voices in our head are bad. So in our way, good voices are getting silenced. So in other words, even if you are maybe spiritually in tune, there's such a bad rap on voices in our head. Like we noticed that these 2 shooters had voices going through their head, that people are like, maybe all voices are bad, and they're not. Number 9, bare minimum or crutch mentality approach to spirituality. Okay? I mean, a lot of times, as Catholics, I hate to say this, but we are in a bare minimum and crutch mentality approach to spirituality. Is I'm a sinner, I go to confession, I'm a sinner. It's a given that we're sinners. It's given that we are. But we need to go and be, growing in holiness through spirituality, okay? And then 10, I would say lack of study on the occult, okay? There are evil things out there. Ouija board, okay? Stay away from. There's a lot of things. Halloween is coming up soon. And there are a lot of promotion of the diabolical and demonic out there at that time. Okay? It's supposed to be All Hallows Eve, and it has become witchcraft out there. All right? So we need to be understanding that, because that's what influences us as well. All right? So those are what's causing us to have this, lack of understanding of these voices, or this fear of understanding the voices in our head. And that's what today's episode is all about. What is causing this? Okay? And pinpointing right now, it's psychology. Most of it is psychology and science. Even diehard Catholics, they'll say they're faithful, but then they'll run to a doctor, they'll run to a therapist, they'll run to all these people and all the medicines that they promote, rather than saying, maybe I should see a spiritual director, or at least minimally a spiritual coach, to help me understand, where am I in my spiritual life, and how is the diabolical, influencing it in the voices in my head? Because there are lots of voices in our heads. So what are the solutions? Okay, the number one solution is, you got to get a spiritual director, a good, sound spiritual director, not just any spiritual director. Someone who really knows and is experienced in the spiritual battle, as well as knows the spiritual aspects, the soul, how the diabolical influences it, those types of things, and willing to get in there and get dirty, okay? And doing that. It's not one of these, spiritual director that's, you're okay, I'm okay, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. If you can't find a spiritual director, minimally you should find a spiritual coach. Someone who knows at least, the spiritual realm of what's going on, okay? And then it can advise you and say, this is what's going on. Now, they're not as good as a spiritual director, okay? But at least they give you a better understanding and help you, and could help you, along the way, okay, until you do find a good spiritual director, okay? I recommend a good spiritual director being a priest, okay? That's what I recommend. But a spiritual coach doesn't have to be a priest, okay? I do help out a lot with that aspect of spiritual coaching, whether personally, I help out as well in the Franciscan Tertiary by being a postulant master. I help them in their spiritual world of what's going on, helping them understand the spirituality and spiritual aspect of it. Because spirituality isn't just, meditating on the rosary and that's it. There's so much to it to help us overcome our, vices, our sins, that can help us, move forward. Just like you would get a trainer for an exercise, you wouldn't go to a gym and start lifting weights. Within 2 weeks, you're probably going to quit because you either over-exercised and are, and depressed that, you can't do it, or you under-exercise where you don't see any results, so why do I even go there? A good spiritual coach will help you, okay, do the right exercises so that at least you can see results, but not go too fast where you're killing yourself, okay? And get a good understanding of your spiritual world. But again, it's a good, sound spiritual director. That's what you should be shooting for. If you can't, find a good spiritual coach. Someone who is, you can find maybe a religious that's a spiritual coach that can help you out, but they must be sound and experienced in the spiritual world. Number two, this will help you out. Understanding the voices in our heads do exist and influence our actions and decisions. You have to understand that. There are voices. You might not hear them, but you're acting upon those voices. And we'll talk about those voices. They do exist. They're out there. They influence our actions and our decisions, okay? Whether you like it or not. Number three, being in tune to the voices in our heads. These voices are important because they create in ourselves this way of growing holy, okay? This is what happens. This is how God is going to influence you. But just like God is influencing us to do good things, there are diabolical things that are influencing us in the bad realm, okay? Number four, proper understanding of the soul. You have to have a proper understanding of the soul. I talk about this in my podcast a lot, about the 3 parts. I know that St. Thomas only talks about 2 parts, but I break it down into 3 parts. The intellect and the will, the memory and the imagination, and then our passions, okay? The passions that are tied to our physical body, okay, which then are tied to the 5 senses, all right, that drive us. So it's important to understand the soul because it helps us see how these various voices kind of go inside of our soul to influence us. Okay? Number 6, we have to focus on growing in virtue and holiness. That's what we got to focus on. And by doing that, you'll rely a lot on these voices, because those voices are important. Right now, the voice, right now, most likely, one of the voices is dominating us, okay? And it's probably the wrong voice, okay, that is dominating us and moving us in a direction that is just making us, half holy, I guess, not complete, all right? We need to listen to one voice and then gather up other voices so that it really augments it and helps us grow forward, okay? So we need to do that. Number 7, here is the 4 voices, okay? I break it down into 4 voices. Today's episode, we're not going to expound on it right now, but the next episode, we're going to talk about these 4 voices, how to leverage those 4 voices and silence leverage the good voices from these 4, and then silence the bad voices. Okay, so let's go over them right now. The first voice that we listen to, the first voice I call the voice of reason. Okay, now the first 2 I'm going to talk about is definitely within the realm of psychology and science, okay? So they are definitely in that realm. And the first voice, as I said, is the voice of reason. Reason is thoughts, the ideas, your intellect, your meditation, and it should be one of your primary, voice to listen to, okay? So especially if you're doing great spiritual reading. If you're not doing great spiritual reading, then it might be skewed. But if you're doing great spiritual reading, which I always emphasize, okay, as the baseline for any type of spirituality is great spiritual reading, okay, reading the Bible, reading the great saints, those types of things. So the voice of reason is your thoughts. This is what psychology will say, that you're thinking out loud or you're meditating. This is your voice of reason, okay? And that should be the most dominant, but it's not, okay, in most cases. For holy and virtuous men, the voice of reason is probably the most dominant, okay? But for most of us, okay, even those, I would call calorics who think that they're a voice of reason, they're really not. All of us are more follow what we call the voice of passion, okay? What do we call the voice of passion? Those emotions and feelings, okay, that come from our body, that comes from our emotions, okay? We are driven and influenced by that, okay? And that's bad. All right? Even those so-called people who think that they're all logical and, blah, blah, blah. No. What they really are basically driven by their passion. They like the feel of comfort of process and everything else. While emotional, sanguine people are people who are, emotionally driven and everything else, and their passion. So all of us are driven by our passion of what we'd like to do. The way that you can tell if a person is, following a voice of reason is if they are doing penance, if they're growing in virtue, okay? A lot of us think that we're holy. We think that we're doing the right thing. But virtuous people know they are because they are growing in virtue. They're growing in holiness. They're eliminating their mortal sins, their voluntary sins, and slowly detaching, okay, from things. And that takes mortification. That takes penance, okay? And so if you don't have a good, level of penance and growing in virtue and love, then the most likely what you're doing is you're just following the voice of passion and just being in your comfort zone. That's basically what it is. If you're in your comfort zone, the chances are you're following the voice of passion, regardless of what that comfort zone is, regardless if it's just, following a process and doing that or, whatever. Because the voice of reason will is the voice that say, you know what? I have to grow in holiness. And to do that, I have to actually mortify myself. I have to detach, okay? This is what great saints did, okay? They understood the greater good being detachment, the greater good being following in God's footstep, which all of the earthly things drag us down, okay? Even good things drag us down, believe it or not. So that's why mortification is so important, okay? So most of us follow the voice of our passion, which is just this, movements of our passions that are, oh, I'm hungry, so we're going to go get something to eat, right? Oh, I forgot today's Friday, or I'm going to, yell at this person, because of X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to just, sometimes, especially the caloric, they're so work-oriented that they run over people. In fact, St. Thomas even said that. St. Thomas said the biggest problem with calorics is they have such low empathy that they just work, and run over people, okay? That's, these aren't my words. These are just, more of a St. Thomas Aquinas' words where, that's what you got to worry about, okay? Especially, a caloric being with, let's say, the melancholic, which are slower, and those types of things. So you have to... You have to not be in your passion. You have to be a reason and say, oh, okay, I have to be a little bit slower and more patient with other people. I have to learn how to become more empathetic and not just go like, all right, this is not reasonable. This is not reasonable. And really you're the ones not being reasonable. It's really you're just following the voice of passion. So now the next two voices we're going to talk about are not in the realm of science and psychology. This is in the realm of theology and spirituality. And so the next two are angelic voice, okay? So we have voices, and I'll call them angelic voices. What are angelic voices? Well, voices from the angels or saints, okay? Some of them are soft, okay? As I said, I can feel at least 2 or 3, probably more like 3, maybe even 3 or 4 times, these soft angelic voices, telling me to feel remorseful for what I've done, okay? Because they make me very sensitive in the wrongs that I've done, okay? Angelic voices to remind me of my prayer. I don't know how many times where, I might be maybe surfing on the internet or something like that, and my angelic angel says, you should be doing your liturgy of the hours now, or you should be doing maybe a little prayer and shut down that internet. And I hear those small little voices, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. Okay? So then you have those, or the great saints, as my wife had, right? So they could be as strong as audible inspirations, okay? Which I've had, my wife had. And then the last is the diabolical voice. Voices from the devil. Either soft or gentle again. Okay? They could be loud. Remember my story about, I heard a voice, not a loud voice, not an audible voice, but a strong, inspiration. I wouldn't call it, I don't know what you would call it, but, this strong, voice that said, just end it all. Just commit suicide. It's all over. That's it. You don't need to worry about this, And so that does happen, okay? And I get those, still now. Not the suicidal ones. Now I get the ones where they're just totally disparaging. I wake up in the morning, they're all like, "You're a loser. You don't want us to get up. You're blah blah whatever it is." Or if I'm trying to accomplish something, and the shadow of doubt, of like, they can't handle that. They're dumb. They're stupid. They'll never be able to help you out. Okay, or your daughter always says bad things. These are diabolical voices, and you just need to shut it up and say, "Stop, okay, stop. I don't need that, today." And so that's what happens. But what happens is these diabolical voices that inspire doubt in your life, people act upon them, and they get so overwhelmed, and great anxiety occurs that they wind up acting almost crazy. Okay, so we do have to understand that, and I've been there. I know how it feels, and we'll talk more about this in the next episode about these voices and how to harness the power of those voices. But there are 4 voices. Let me wrap that up. Voice of reason, thoughts, ideas, intellect, and meditation. Voice of passion, the passions inside of us that are influenced with emotions and feelings, the feelings tied to our 5 senses. And then we have the angelic voice, and we have the diabolical voices. Those are the four voices that are constantly hitting our head that we need to discern, as well as, harness the good voices and just ignore the bad voices, okay? So in conclusion, like it or not, we are always bombarded by voices in our heads. The world always has explanations, either through science or psychology, of what those voices are, but rarely discuss the spiritual aspect of those voices, that they might be angelic or diabolical, leading us to good or evil actions, as we see with the mass shooters and great saints. The devil loves to know that he can torment people by diabolical obsessions, with science and psychology masking his evil ways. But not only do we need to defend ourselves with bad voices, but more importantly, we need to be in tune with the voices to harness the good voices to help us become saints. Next week's episode, we will do a deeper dive on the four voices and learn what to avoid and how to ignore the bad voices, and what we do to harness and be in tune to the good voices so we can grow in virtue and in holiness. Let's end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Please share this podcast to others, especially if they have benefited you. Also, feel free to share any reflections or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.